They are raised by you, who are always thinking of the good of others. Although you know everything, you ask such questions because that is the behavior of saintly persons. Such intelligence is benefiting your position. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Maharaj Prithu was well conversant in transcendental science, yet he presented himself before the Kumaras as one ignorant of it. The idea is that even if a person is very exalted and knows everything before his superior, he should present questions. For instance, although Arjuna knew all the transcendental science, he questioned Krishna as if he did not know. Similarly, Prithu Maharaja knew everything, but he presented himself before the Kumaras as if he did not know anything. The idea is that the questions by exalted persons put before the Supreme Personality of Godhead or his devotees are meant for the benefit of the general people. Therefore, sometimes great personalities put themselves in that position and inquire from a higher authority because they are always thinking of the benefit of others. Well, oftentimes we say, are there any questions? And there is complete silence. That's not good. We should always have some questions, even though we know what the answers are. But it's for the benefit of others that we ask questions. It's not just we know everything, so we don't have to ask any questions. No. And that's what it says here. It says, although you know everything, you ask such questions because that is the behavior of saintly persons. Such intelligence is befitting your position. Okay. And in the purport, it says, Maharaj Prithu was well conversant in transcendental science, yet he presented himself before the Kumaras as one ignorant of it. The idea is that even if a person is very exalted and knows everything before his superior, he should present questions. For instance, although Arjuna knew all the transcendental science, he questioned our Krishna as if he did not know. Similarly, Prithu Maharaja knew everything, but he presented himself before the Kumaras as if he did not know anything. The idea is that questions are exalted, that questions by exalted persons put before the Supreme Personality of Godhead or his devotees are meant for the benefit of the general people. Therefore, sometimes great personalities put themselves in that position and inquire from a higher authority because they are always thinking of the benefit of others. So whenever I say, are there any questions? And there's a deep silence. Nobody says anything. That's not a good sign. That means either you know everything or you don't know everything. But either way, it's not good to stay silent. And this verse proves that. It says, Prithu Maharaj knew everything, but he presented himself before the Kumaras as if he did not know anything. The idea is that questions by exalted persons put before the Supreme Personality of Godhead or his devotees are meant for the benefit of the general people. Therefore, sometimes great personalities put themselves in that position and inquire from a higher authority because they are always thinking of the benefit of others. Yeah. All right. So today, if I say, are there any questions? And there's a deep silence. That means we're not really doing the right thing. But we should always have questions, even though we know the answers. It's for the benefit of others that such questions should be asked. Text number 19. When there is a congregation of devotees, their discussions, questions, and answers become conclusive to both the speaker and the audience. Thus, such a meeting is beneficial for everyone's real happiness. Yeah, so whether if there is a program and there should be discussion, and the discussion is for the benefit not only of oneself but of others. So when the speaker says, "Are there any questions?" and nobody asks any questions, that's not very good. It means that the people are either not listening or they don't really care to have a discussion. So the whole point of Krishna consciousness is to have questions and in that way have discussion about the what you hear and make sure you understand it properly. You might say, well, I do understand it, but you can get a deeper understanding by having a discussion. Okay, so that's text number 19 says, when there is a congregation of devotees, their discussions, questions, and answers become conclusive to both the speaker and the audience. Thus, such a meeting is beneficial for everyone's real happiness. Okay, so purport by Srila Prabhupada. Hearing discussions among the devotees is the only means to receive the powerful message of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. For instance, Bhagavad Gita has been well known all over the world for a very long time, especially in the Western world. But because the subject matter was not discussed by devotees, there was no effect. Not a single person in the West became Krishna conscious before the Krishna consciousness movement was founded. But when the same Bhagavad Gita was presented as it is, through the disciplic succession, the effect of spiritual realization was immediately manifested. Sanat Kumara, one of the Kumaras, informed Pritha Maharaj that his meeting with the Kumaras benefited not only Maharaj Pritha, but the Kumaras as well. When Narada Muni questioned Lord Brahma about the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Brahma thanked Narada Muni for giving him a chance to speak about the Supreme Lord. Therefore, and this is the main thing, questions put by a saintly person to another saintly person about the Supreme Personality of Godhead or about the ultimate goal of life surcharge everyone spiritually. There you go. Whoever takes advantage of such discussions is benefited, both in this life and in the next. The word Ubay Asham can be described in many ways. Generally, there are two classes of men, the materialists and the transcendentalists. By hearing discussions between devotees, both the materialists and transcendentalists are benefited. The materialist is benefited by association with devotees because his life then becomes regulated so that his chance of becoming a devotee or making the present life successful for understanding the real position of the living entity is increased. When one takes advantage of this opportunity, he is assured of a human form of life in the next birth, or he may be liberated completely and go back home, back to Godhead. The conclusion is that if one participates in a discussion of devotees, he is both materially and spiritually benefited. The speaker and the audience are both benefited, and the karmas and jnanis are benefited. The discussion of spiritual matters amongst devotees is beneficial for everyone, without exception. Consequently, the Kumaras admitted that not only was the king benefited by such a meeting, but the Kumaras were as well. So in other words, you don't ask any questions, you don't get any answers, you don't learn anything. And nobody else also learns something. Therefore, there should always be questions. Even if you know what the answer is, there should always be questions and discussions of the purports and the verses. So that is, even if you know what the answer is, it's for the benefit of others. If everyone remains silent, guess what? Nobody understands anything. But if you have the curiosity to know, then you'll ask a question. And even if you know the answer, you ask a question for the benefit of the others also. If you think, oh, well, I know the answer, so I'm not even going to ask a question. No, that's not good. And that's why it says here, it says, if the conclusion is that if one participates in a discussion of devotees, he is both materially and spiritually benefited. The speaker and the audience are both benefited, and the karmis and jnanis are benefited. The discussion of spiritual matters amongst devotees is beneficial for everyone, without exception. Consequently, the Kumaras admitted that not only was the king benefited by such a meeting, but the Kumaras were as well. So, the questions that the devotees ask, at a certain point, I might say, okay, are there any questions? If there's a deep silence, that means that either the people don't know anything, or they're sleeping, or they have a dead mind, and they're not really interested in the subject. But if you ask a question, there will be discussion, and during the discussion, you learn things. And even if you know the answer to a question, by asking a question, you inspire other people also to ask questions and to hear the answers, and especially the discussion of devotees. And that is beneficial for everyone. Therefore, it says here, it says, by hearing discussions between devotees, both the materialist and transcendentalists are benefited. The materialist is benefited by association with devotees, because his life then becomes regulated so that his chance of becoming a devotee or making the present life successful for understanding the real position of the living entity is increased. When one takes advantage of this opportunity, he is assured of a human form of life in the next birth, or he may be liberated completely and go back home, back to Godhead. The conclusion is that if one participates in a discussion of devotees, he is both materially and spiritually benefited. The speaker and the audience are both benefited, and the karmis and jnanis are benefited. The discussion of spiritual matters amongst devotees is beneficial for everyone, without exception. Consequently, the Kumaras admitted that not only was the king benefited by such a meeting, but the Kumaras were as well. So, discussion of spiritual matters amongst devotees is beneficial for everyone without exception. But if nobody asks a question, there's not going to be any discussion, and therefore nobody's going to be benefited. And so it's for, even if you know what the answer is, by asking a question, it inspires a discussion. And even if you know what the answer is, you might learn something new, or you'll help other people learn something by asking a question. Okay, so now we know that whenever I say, are there any questions? You should raise your hand and ask a question. Otherwise, if you don't, that means you might be brain dead, not have any inquisitive, thoughts, maybe sleeping or not really interested in the subject, etc. But here it says, look what it says. It says, the conclusion is that if one participates in a discussion of devotees, he is both materially and spiritually benefited. The speaker and the audience are both benefited, and the karmis and jnanis are benefited. The discussion of spiritual matters amongst devotees is beneficial for everyone, without exception. Consequently, the Kumaras admitted that not only was the king benefited by such a meeting, but the Kumaras were as well. So, it's important to ask questions, even though you may know the answer. Why? Because if you ask a question, then there's a good chance that there'll be discussion between devotees. Both the materialist and the transcendentalist are benefited. The materialist is benefited by association with devotees, because his life then becomes regulated, so that his chance of becoming a devotee or making the present life successful for understanding the real position of the living entity is increased. When one takes advantage of this opportunity, he is assured of a human form of life in the next birth, or he may be liberated completely and go back to Godhead. The conclusion is that if one participates in a discussion of devotees, he is both materially and spiritually benefited. The speaker and the audience are both benefited, and the karmas and jnanis are benefited. The discussion of spiritual matters amongst devotees is beneficial for everyone, without exception. Consequently, the Kumaras admitted that not only was the king benefited by such a meeting, but the Kumaras as well. So, no questions, no answers, no understanding, and that means that you're most probably brain dead. But if you ask questions, then there's going to be discussion. And through the discussions of devotees, you learn something, and you become more excited about learning. Yeah. Okay. So any questions about that?
Yes, Maharaj. I have one question, Maharaj.
You got a question? Good. Means you're not brain dead.
It's a very beautiful sloka, Maharaj. So everyone is getting benefited, but the discussion has to be the spiritual matters. So the critical thing.
Well, yeah, you don't talk about baseball, football, basketball. Yeah, of course. Yeah. There's so much to learn about spiritual matters. Like, you don't ask any questions at all, and you're never going to learn anything. Yeah. And here it says, hearing discussions among the devotees is the only means to receive the powerful message of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So if there are no questions, you're not going to learn anything. For instance, Bhagavad Gita has been well known all over the world for a very long time, especially in the Western world. But because the subject matter was not discussed by devotees, there was no effect. Not a single person in the West became Krishna conscious before the Krishna consciousness movement was founded. But when the same Bhagavad Gita was presented as it is, through the disciplic succession, the effect of spiritual realization was immediately manifested. Yeah, because there was discussion, there were questions, there were answers, there was discussion, and people began to take an interest in the subject. But if there are no questions, then people they don't learn anything, and they get bored, and they just go to sleep. Okay.
Through questions also, so many things will come out of the discussion, right, Maharaj?
Yes.
Arjuna, even though he knows the answers, he raised the question.
Yes.
And Narada Mahamuni, Brahma, even though he knows about the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he raised the questions to Brahma.
Absolutely.
And Vidura also, he had a question. He raised a concern to Maitreya. Vidura, I think Uddhava, right? Uddhava. First he raised the questions to Uddhava, and then.
Okay. Are there any questions?
Right.
Yes.
Right. Sometimes, like after we ask a question, I sometimes get the feeling like, oh, I asked the question, so like nobody else asked the question. I'm so great. Like how to get rid of feelings like that?
Well, are you really so great?
No.
The position of the devotee is to be always very humble. But you should be inquisitive. And even if you know the answer, you should ask the question for the benefit of others. If you remain silent, not only you are not instructed or educated, but others don't have a chance of hearing a discussion and getting educated. If you go through every class not asking any questions, and that means you're not really interested in the subject matter. You can't wait till class is over so you can go back and do whatever you want to do, sleep or eat or talk nonsense on a cell phone. So, yeah, we should definitely have questions. And even if you know the answers, you should still ask a question for the benefit of others. Okay. So it says here, generally, there are two classes of men, the materialist and the transcendentalist. By hearing discussions between devotees, both the materialist and the transcendentalist are benefited. The materialist is benefited by association with devotees because his life then becomes regulated so that his chance of becoming a devotee or his chance of becoming a devotee or making the present life successful for understanding the real position of the living entity is increased. When one takes advantage of this opportunity, he is assured of a human form of life in the next birth, or he may be liberated completely and go back home, back to Godhead. The conclusion is that if one participates in a discussion of devotees, he is both materially and spiritually benefited. The speaker and the audience are both benefited, and the karmis and gyanis are benefited. The discussion of spiritual matters amongst devotees is beneficial for everyone, without exception. Consequently, the Kumaras admitted that not only was the king benefited by such a meeting, but the Kumaras were as well. Text number 20. Sanat Kumara continued, my dear king, you already have an inclination to glorify the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of God. Such attachment is very difficult to achieve, but when one has attained such unflinching faith in the Lord, it automatically cleanses lusty desires from the core of the heart. Whoa, very nice verse. Purport. Satam prasangam mamavirya samvido bhavanti hritkarna rasayana kata taj josanad asvavargavartmani shradaratir bhaktir anukramisyati. Srimad Bhagavatam 3.25.25. By association with devotees, dirty things within the heart of a materialistic man are gradually washed away by the grace of the Supreme Personality of God. As silver becomes shiny by being polished, the heart of a materialistic person is cleansed of lusty desires by the good association of devotees. Actually, the living being has no connection with this material enjoyment, nor with lusty desires. He is simply imagining or dreaming while asleep. But by the association of pure devotees, he is awakened. And immediately the spirit soul is situated in his own glory by understanding his constitutional position as the eternal servant of the Lord. Prithu Maharaja was already a self-realized soul. Therefore, he had a natural inclination to glorify the activities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And the Kumaras assured him that there was no chance of his falling victim to the illusory energy of the Supreme Lord. In other words, the process of hearing and chanting. The process of hearing and chanting about the glories of the Lord is the only means to clarify the heart of material contamination. By the process of karma, jnana, and yoga, no one will succeed in driving away contamination from the heart. But once a person takes to the shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord by devotional service, automatically all dirty things in the heart are removed without difficulty. Okay, so when it says, in other words, the process of hearing and chanting, well, when it says chanting, it also implies discussion. You hear something and then you have a discussion about what you heard. So the process of hearing and chanting about the glories of the Lord is the only means to clarify the heart of material contamination. Okay. So, whenever the speaker says, "Are there any questions?" What should we do?
We should raise a question.
Yes. Yeah, you should ask a question.
Yes.
There's so many questions that we should have if we're listening carefully to the lecture. Okay, so text number 21. It has been conclusively decided in the scriptures, after due consideration, that the ultimate goal for the welfare of human society is detachment from the bodily concept of life and increased and steadfast attachment for the Supreme Lord, who is transcendental beyond the modes of material nature. Purport for Srila Prabhupada. Everyone in human society is engaged for the ultimate benefit of life, but persons who are in the bodily conception cannot achieve the ultimate goal, nor can they understand what it is. The ultimate goal of life is described in Bhagavad Gita 2.59. Param dristva nivartate. When one finds out the supreme goal of life, he naturally becomes detached from the bodily concept. Here is the verse that, here in this verse, the indication is that one has to steadfastly increase attachment for the transcendence or Brahman. Attachment for the transcendence, and then parentheses, Brahmani, as confirmed in the Vedanta Sutra 1.1.1, Atato Brahma Jigyasa. What does that mean? Now let us ask questions and inquire about the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Without inquiry about the Supreme or the transcendence, one cannot give up attachment for this material world. By the evolutionary process in 8,400,000 species of life, one cannot understand the ultimate goal of life, because in all those species of life, the bodily concept is very prominent. Atato Brahma Jigyasa means that in order to get out of the bodily conception, one has to increase attachment to or inquiry about Brahman. In other words, one should ask questions. Then he can be situated in the transcendental devotional service. Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu. To increase attachment for Brahman means to engage in devotional service. Those who are attached to the impersonal form of Brahman cannot remain attached for very long. Those who are attached to the impersonal form of Brahman cannot remain attached for very long. Impersonal form of Brahman cannot remain attached for very long. Impersonalists, after rejecting the world as mithya or false, Jagan Mithya, come down again to this Jagan Mithya, although they take sannyasa to increase their attachment for Brahman. Similarly, many yogis who are attached to the localized aspect of Brahman as Paramatma, great sages like Vishwamitra, also fall down as victims of women. Therefore, increased attachment for the Supreme Personality of Godhead is advised in all Shastras. That is the only way of detachment from material existence. and is explained in Bhagavad Gita 259 as Param Drishtva Nivartate. One can cease material activities when he actually has the taste for devotional service. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also recommended love of Godhead as the ultimate goal of life. Prema Pumartha Mahan. Without increasing love of Godhead, one cannot achieve the perfectional stage of the transcendental position. Well, one has to be inquisitive. One has to have questions. One has to have the curiosity to dig deeper and deeper into the knowledge of Krishna consciousness. That's why it says that Atato Brahma Jigyasa, without inquiry, in other words, without asking questions about the Supreme or the Transcendence, one cannot give up attachment for this material world. By the evolutionary process in 8,400,000 species of life, one cannot understand the ultimate goal of life, because in all those species of life, the bodily conception is very prominent. Atato Brahma Jigyasa means that in order to get out of the bodily conception, one has to increase attachment to or inquiry about Brahman. Inquiry means you want to know more, therefore you ask questions. Then he can be situated in a transcendental devotional service. Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu. We should Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu. We should have the interest and engage in talking about Lord Vishnu. To increase attachment for Brahman means to engage in devotional service. Those who are attached to the impersonal form of Brahman cannot remain attached for very long. Impersonalists, after rejecting this world as mithya or false, Jagan Mithya, come down again to this Jagan Mithya or material world, although they take sannyas to increase their attachment for Brahman. Similarly, many yogis who are attached to the localized aspect of Brahman as Paramatma, great sages like Vishwamitra, also fall down as victims of women. Therefore, increased attachment for the Supreme Personality of Godhead is advised in all Shastras. This is the only way of detachment from material existence, and is explained in Bhagavad Gita 259 as Param Drishtva Nivartate. That means that one has a great thirst for understanding knowledge of Krishna. One can cease material activities when he actually has the taste for devotional service. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also recommended love of Godhead as the ultimate goal of life. Prema Pramartho Mahan. Without increasing love of Godhead, one cannot achieve the perfectional stage of the transcendental solution. Okay, so not everybody has love for Krishna, but everyone should be inquisitive to learn more and more about Krishna. Atato Brahma Jigyasa. Without inquiry, in other words, without asking questions about the Supreme or the Transcendence, one cannot give up attachment for this material world. That is our takeaway today. Atato Brahma Jigyasa. Now let us inquire about the absolute truth. That's the Vedanta Sutra 1.1.1. Atato Brahma Jigyasa. Without inquiry, in other words, without questions about the Supreme or the transcendence, one cannot give up attachment for this material world. All right. By the evolutionary process of 8.4 million species of life, one cannot understand the ultimate goal of life because in all those species of life, the bodily conception is very prominent. Atato Brahma Jigyasa. Now let us inquire about the truth or the absolute truth. Means that in order to get out of the bodily conception, one has to increase attachment to or inquiry about Brahma. So inquiry means you want to ask questions and find out what is Brahman. Then he can be situated in the transcendental devotional service. Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu. To increase attachment for Brahman, meaning the Supreme Absolute Truth, means to engage in devotional service. Those who are attached to the impersonal form of Brahman cannot remain attached for very long. Impersonalists, after rejecting this world as mithya or false, Jagan Mithya, come down again to this Jagan Mithya, or this false material world, although they take sannyasa to increase their attachment for Brahman. Similarly, many yogis who are attached to the localized aspect of Brahman as Paramatma, great sages like Vishwamitra also fall down as victims of limit. Therefore, increased attachment for the Supreme Personality Godhead is advised in all Shastras. That is the only way of detachment from material existence, and is explained in Bhagavad Gita 2.59 as Param Drishtva Nivartate. Now, what does that mean? Param Drishtva Nivartate. It means that one develops a taste for understanding Krishna. I look up Bhagavad Gita 2.59. What does it say? Bhagavad Gita 2.59. Yeah.
Though the embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, the taste for sense objects remains. But ceasing such engagements by experiencing a higher taste, he is fixed in consciousness.
Well, what is that higher taste? That higher taste is hearing and chanting about the glories of Krishna. Yeah.
Hare Krishna.
Yeah.
My question is that when we're hearing about the Lord,
Yeah.
sometimes my mind
Wanders.
Yeah. And how do I keep it fixed on what I'm hearing?
Okay, very good question. Yes, questions. That's how you can stop your mind from wandering. You ask questions. That means you're alive. If you ask no questions and your mind is just wandering, then basically you'll never learn anything. So even if you know the answer, you can ask questions for the benefit of others. That should be, that means that you're interested in the subject, and by asking questions, you invigorate the speaker. The speaker becomes more enthusiastic also, because he knows that, someone at least is hearing what I'm saying. Otherwise, if everyone remains silent, when the person says, are there any questions? Nobody asks a question. Then the speaker knows that people are not really interested in the subject, and they can't wait until the class is over so they can do other things. But when you become interested in the subject, you'll have hundreds of questions. Right? And even if you know the answers, you still ask questions for the benefit of others. Okay. All right. So.
One question, Maharaj.
Yeah.
So in this paragraph, the statement to increase the attachment for Brahman means to engage in devotional service.
Yeah.
So here in this statement, the Brahman means it's not the localized aspect of Paramatma, but it's the personal form of Lord Bhagavan. Is that correct understanding?
Yes. So our takeaway from this verse 21 is, without increasing love of Godhead, one cannot achieve the perfectional stage of the transcendental position. Now, how do you increase love of Godhead? Well, the more you learn about the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the more you are attracted to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and the more you're attracted to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the more you develop love for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, without increasing love of Godhead, one cannot achieve the perfectional stage of the transcendental position. So, we should understand what it means. Param dristva nivartate. Did you look it up? Param dristva nivartate means that you develop a higher taste for Krishna consciousness knowledge. But what does it say? Param dristva nivartate. Huh?
The translation says, though the embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, the taste for sense objects remains. But seizing such engagements by experiencing a higher taste, he is fixed in consciousness.
So, Param dristva nivartate means that you develop a higher taste and you give up the lower taste and you become inspired by the higher taste of Krishna consciousness. So what is that higher taste? It's developed by hearing and discussion about Brahman or Krishna. Who is Krishna? What does he like to eat? Where does he live? What is his favorite, let's say, devotee? And so many things. So the more you learn about Krishna, the more reasons you have to love Krishna. So, and that's why it says that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also recommended that love of Godhead as the ultimate goal of life, or param, or prema pumartha mahan. That's the highest. That's the highest ultimate goal of life. Prema pumartha mahan, to develop pure love and devotion for Krishna. Without increasing love of Godhead, one cannot achieve the perfectional stage of the transcendental position. So this principle, param dristva nivartate, Bhagavad Gita 2:59. Okay, did you look up Bhagavad Gita 2:59?
Yes, ma'am. We just read the translation.
Say it again.
The translation of 259.
Yeah.
Though the embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, the taste for sense objects remains. But seizing such engagements by experiencing a higher taste,
What did it say? By what?
by experiencing
Experiencing, yes.
a higher taste,
Yes.
he is fixed in consciousness.
Okay, that's what it means. Paranjrisva nivartate. It's when you taste and you get a higher taste of from hearing and chanting about the Lord. That's when you give up lower taste. You can't give up the lower taste unless you have a higher taste. So the lower taste is talking nonsense, engaging in sense gratification, and so forth. And the higher taste is serving Krishna with love and devotion. Then you give up the lower taste. Now the Mayavadis, their let's say, solution to the problem of how to become, spiritually elevated is to give up talking. So they stop talking. They remain silent. But how long can you remain silent? One day. If I said right now, okay, everyone, today our lesson is to remain silent. How long do you think that would last? It wouldn't last very long, right? So you don't learn by remaining silent, but you become invigorated, you become excited by hearing discussions of Krishna consciousness and engaging in those discussions and having curiosity to learn more by asking questions. Therefore, increased attachment for the Supreme Personality of Godhead is advised in all Shastras. That is the only way of detachment from material existence and is explained in Bhagavad Gita 259, Param Dristva Nivartate, having a higher taste. One can cease material activities when he actually has the taste for devotional service. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also recommended love of Godhead as the ultimate goal of life. Prema Pumartha Mahan. Without increasing love of Godhead, one cannot achieve the perfection stage of the transcendental position. So, how do you develop love for Krishna? Well, the more you learn about Krishna, all his transcendental qualities, and all his transcendental activities, and all his transcendental, let's say, achievements, the more you have reasons to love Krishna. If you don't understand anything about Krishna, well, there's no possibility of developing love for Krishna. But the more you learn about the Lord, the more you become excited about serving the Lord. So that's why we have class. That's why we have purports. If you only read verses and avoid the purports given by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, you will not feel let's say, inspired or let's say, thirsting to hear more. Prabhupada said that his purports are spiritual ecstasies. So, therefore, there are some devotees, or there are some people that only read the verses and never read the purports. I know people like that. They don't read the purports, they just read the verses. So you won't become spiritually enthusiastic by doing that. But if you hear the verses and then you hear the purports and then you discuss the verse and the purports, then you get an excitement to keep hearing and keep learning about Krishna. So here it says, Param Dristva Nivartate. Excuse me. What does that mean? It means when you get a higher taste, then you become more excited about learning about Krishna. And what is that higher taste? Well, you're learning more and more things about who Krishna is, then you become more interested in Krishna. If you don't know anything about Krishna, then you're not going to be inspired to learn more about Krishna. But if you begin to learn about Krishna day after day, more and more knowledge of Krishna, you become more and more enthusiastic to serve Krishna. And that is the real purpose of knowledge. Real knowledge is knowledge of Krishna. All the other so-called knowledges are nonsense. Real knowledge is knowledge of Krishna, because you will become more and more attached to Krishna and eventually develop love of Krishna and be liberated from the cycle of birth and death. Okay. Our takeaway is Prema Pumartha Mahan. Without increasing love of Godhead, one cannot achieve the perfectional stage of the transcendental position. Okay. That's why it says, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also recommended love of Godhead as the ultimate goal of life. Prema Pumartha Mahan. Without increasing love of Godhead, one cannot achieve the perfectional stage of the transcendental position. So a person who loves God, they are very enthusiastic when there are classes and when there's discussion about Krishna. In other words, they're very interested in the subject matter. Just like some people, they get very excited when there is prajalpa. What is prajalpa?
Talking unnecessary.
Talking nonsense. Yeah, because to talk nonsense, you don't have to know anything. You just make things up, you know. And especially, young kids, teenagers, when they all get together, they start talking nonsense. They get all excited. The more nonsense, the more excited they become. Then they have to come to class. They can't talk nonsense. They get bored. But as soon as they leave the class, they go out of the classroom. Oh, they get so excited. They start talking about so much nonsense things. What did you eat today? Oh, I had a hamburger. Oh, wonderful. Start talking all kinds of things. But when you get this higher taste, one can cease material activities when he actually has the taste for devotional service. Just like, you develop different tastes in life. Like, for example, I like to have 7-Up soda. Well, that's a taste that you develop, right? Well, Prabhupada liked 7-Up soda, so I've developed that taste also. But that's not the purpose of life. But it has something to do with the higher taste. The higher taste is not achieved by hearing nonsense talks by people. But if you get inspired by hearing discussions about Krishna, that's a higher taste. And the more you hear about Krishna, the more you become invigorated, the more you become active in Krishna consciousness, the more you develop faith in Krishna. That's the whole purpose of having these classes, to get excited about Krishna, to inquire meaning ask questions about Krishna, to develop this taste, to learn more and more about Krishna. So that is the real purpose of class.
Hare
There,
Krishna Maharaj.
yeah,
Sorry.
go ahead.
Sorry, Maharaj. Yeah. So Maharaj, once we say that we have faith in Krishna and we love to hear about Krishna, is it also we have to discriminate about like what question to ask, what kind of question to ask, where you're not challenging the scriptures itself or Prabhupada's purpose itself? So do you have to be, we have to be respectful to the speaker and careful about what kind of question to ask, right? Because when we say we have faith in Prabhupada, we have faith in Krishna, then we have to be careful about our question as well.
Well, you have to be careful about everything you say, whether it's about Krishna or whether it's in this general discussion with people. You always have to have measured statements.
Right.
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 You can't just talk nonsense. I mean, in the classroom, people ask some questions, they take notes, and they listen to what the teacher says. As soon as they walk outside the classroom, they start talking nonsense. That happens in your school. Yes. So, a devotee will avoid the discussion of nonsensical things. A devotee will always keep focused on Krishna consciousness. That's how you know who is a devotee and who is not a devotee. The devotee gets pleasure from talking about Krishna, and the non-devotee gets pleasure by talking nonsense. So you can tell who is a devotee, who's not a devotee, by what they talk about. So if one is always talking about Krishna, that means they're a genuine devotee. And if someone is talking nonsense, that means they're not interested in Krishna. They're interested in just talking nonsense. And to talk nonsense, you don't have to learn anything. You just make things up. Oh, what did you eat today? Oh, I ate a hot dog. Oh, wonderful. I like hot dogs also. Those are the type of discussions that are going on when people are basically brain dead. But when a person is not brain dead, they'll say, well, what was the class about today? And someone will say, well, we spoke about this, how to engage in Krishna conscious activities and develop detachment from material existence and get this higher taste. By getting the higher taste, you can give up the lower taste of sense gratification. And one can cease material activities when he or she actually has a taste for devotional service. So our real purpose should be to develop this taste for bhakti or devotional service. And Lord Chaitanya also recommended that love of God is the ultimate goal of life. The ultimate goal is not to have a Tesla car or to go on a vacation or whatever. The ultimate goal is to develop love of Godhead as the ultimate goal of life. All right. So we just learned today what is the ultimate goal of life. So many people are trying to figure out what is the ultimate goal of life. Why am I living? What should I really be doing? What is the real goal of life or real achievement of life? Well, the answer is here today in the purport. One can cease material activities when he actually has the taste for devotional service. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also recommended love of Godhead as the ultimate goal of life. Prema Pumartha Mahan. Without increasing love of Godhead, one cannot achieve the perfectional stage of the transcendental position. Okay, so we just learned today what is the ultimate goal of life and how to attain it. That's why it says, therefore, increased attachment for the Supreme Personality of God is advised in all Shastras. That is the only way of detachment from material existence, and is explained in Bhagavad Gita 2:59 as Param Drisva Nivartate. One can cease material activities only when he actually has the taste for devotional service. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also recommended love of God as the ultimate goal of life, Prema Pumartha Mahan. Without increasing love of Godhead, one cannot achieve the perfectional stage of the transcendental position. Well, this is a very profound, let's say, discussion today. We're learning what is the ultimate goal of life. Not many people have discussions like this. They're too busy trying to figure out what kind of what's the best stock to buy so they can make more money, or what's the best investment they can make. So they'll be talking together every day on the phone. You know, which stock should we buy today? What's the best investment? How can we make more money? What is this strategy? What is that strategy for becoming more wealthy or protecting one's wealth and so forth? These are the type of things people are talking about. Then when they make a good amount of money, they're always talking about what's the best place to go for vacation. And what's the best car I should buy? And who builds the best house? They're talking about so many things, all based on bodily sense gratification. They're not thinking about the soul. They're not thinking about, hey, what happens when one dies? They don't want to think about things like that. They consider that morbid discussion. Look up that word, morbid. But when one actually has a taste for Krishna consciousness and devotional service, then one comes on the platform of developing love of Godhead, which is the ultimate goal of life. Without increasing love of Godhead, one cannot achieve the perfectional stage of the transcendental position. So we might be engaged in service without genuine love for God. But when we develop genuine love for God, the quality of our devotional service increases many, many times. And now we get a taste and joyfulness from devotional service. If we don't have that joy and happiness by engaging in devotional service, well, we might perform devotional service, but it is not really exciting. It's not really our cup of tea. But when we have a serious interest in Krishna and we engage in Krishna consciousness, that is our real life. That is our real enjoyment in life. That is our real purpose in life. That is our real, let's say, consciousness is always hearing and glorifying Krishna. So that has to be developed. That's called the higher taste. Yeah, what did it? I asked the question. What did it say?
Morbid, Maharaj.
Morbid, yeah. What does it mean?
Characterized by an unusual interest in disturbing and unpleasant subjects, especially death and disease.
Especially what?
Death and disease.
Death and disease. Did we talk about death and disease today?
No.
No. What did we talk about today?
So you are talking about people talking to other people of mundane things. They have a lot of interest in those things.
Well, we talked about that somewhat, but the main subject was paramdrishta nivartate, getting the higher tastes of Krishna consciousness. That way you give up the lower taste of talking about nonsense.
And you said that they never ask questions about why are we dying and why are we...
They don't have any questions. Yeah. Prabhupada would always say, are there any questions? And those devotees who were very excited by hearing Prabhupada speak, they would always ask questions so that Prabhupada would speak more. Yeah. One time I was on a morning walk with Prabhupada, and it was the appearance day of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So we were walking, it was, outside with Prabhupada. And I said, the question I asked Prabhupada was, well, Prabhupada, what did you think of your guru on this day? And he stopped walking and looked at me and gave me a bad look. He said, this is not a proper question. Why? Because asking a question like that is putting myself on the same level as Prabhupada, And Prabhupada said, this is not a good question, and he was not pleased, I kept my mouth shut after that, Yeah, I mean, I'm not a god brother of Srila Prabhupada. I am his devotee, so I should not ask a question like that. His god brother might want to ask a question like that, but not me. So I should ask Prabhupada questions about, how to make more progress in Krishna consciousness. I don't know if that's a question he should ask. How can I make more progress in Krishna consciousness? What did you think about your guru, Srila Prabhupada, on this day? That's not a question. That means I'm putting myself on the same level as Prabhupada. So he reprimanded me for that. And I was happy. I'm always happy when Prabhupada scolds me. That means he has love for me. That means he's correcting my nonsense. Right? But of course, once you get corrected for saying something nonsensical, you should never speak any nonsense again. If you just keep speaking over and over nonsense, that means you don't learn anything. So Prabhupada would correct the devotees when they would say things that were not appropriate. But to continue to say nonsensical things is very bad. It means you're not learning anything. You're not respecting anything that Prabhupada has taught us. So, one can cease material activities when he actually has taste for devotional service. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also recommended love of Godhead as the ultimate goal of life. Prema Pramartha Mahan. Without increasing love of Godhead, one cannot achieve the perfectional stage of the transcendental position. Okay, this is our takeaway for today. And our, let's say, motto for today is Param Drisva Nivartate. Bhagavad Gita 2:59. When one gets a higher taste, he gives up the lower taste. So that higher taste is love of God. And the lower taste is love of nonsense. So when we give up the lower taste and we accept the higher taste, we actually become a devotee at that time. Hare Krishna. Without increasing love of Godhead, one cannot achieve the perfectional stage of the transcendental position. Well, how do you increase your love of Godhead? The more you hear bona fide statements about Krishna, the more chance you have of developing love of Godhead. So that means that you should come very regularly to the classes, and hopefully the discussion in the classes is about how to love Krishna. Then you make spiritual advancement. Haribol. Okay, any questions, comments? Okay, so our takeaway today is text 22, which says, attachment for the Supreme can be increased by practicing devotional service, inquiring about the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That means asking questions about the Personality of Godhead, applying bhakti yoga in life. So whatever you have learned about Krishna consciousness, you should apply it in life. Worshipping the Yogeshwara, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and by hearing and chanting about the glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. These actions are pious in themselves. That is our takeaway. Text 22, chapter 4, Canto 4, chapter 22, and verse number 22. Attachment for the Supreme can be increased by practicing devotional service, inquiring, meaning asking questions about the Supreme Personality of Godhead, applying bhakti yoga in life, worshipping the Yogeshwara, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and by hearing and chanting about the glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. These actions are pious in themselves. Haribol. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Any other questions?
Okay. On what's Bhagavad Gita 2.59.
Yeah.
So Maharaj's translation says, though the embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, the taste for sense objects remains. So my question is, while we are hearing and trying to practice devotional service, the mind is still thinking in like old way, like with lust, anger, and greed.
Yeah, but
it's always a friction to not to listen to mind and continue on devotional service. So how to deal with that? The way mind is thinking. Because mind is still thinking in the same way. Although our actions has changed, internally, the mind is giving the same lust, anger, greed thoughts. So how to reduce that friction?
Well, wait a minute. Bhagavad Gita 259, it says, Param Drishta Nivartate. When you get a higher taste, you give up the lower taste. So we should give up hearing about baseball, football, basketball, the stock market, rumors about this person or that person. And we should only hear about Krishna and his transcendental activities and transcendental, what you would say, verses that glorify the Lord, etc. So that is a decision that we have to make. It's just like one time a man was walking down the street and he saw a big pile of stool. And in the stool, he saw a worm. So he thought, oh my God, the poor worm, it's in this pile of stool. So he carefully picked up the worm and moved it about 10 feet away, thinking, now he won't be in the stool anymore. But then, to his horror, he saw that the worm inched its way back to the stool. So, unless we really have this higher taste for hearing about Krishna, we will all be like that stool. That worm. Even though for some short period we are feeling or experiencing Krishna consciousness, but after the class, we inch back like the worm to the stool, start hearing nonsense again. So we have to be very careful. We don't want to be like that worm, So that's why it's recommended. It's like Haridas Thakur. He chanted Hare Krishna 24 hours a day. That should be, well, we can't, be equal to Haridas Thakur, but we can follow his general practice, always chanting Hare Krishna. Then we will lose our attraction to other things. But if we never lose that attraction to other things, then we're like that worm in the stool. Somebody picked the worm out of the stool and said, oh, my dear brother, it's not very good to be in the stool. And I'm going to help you. I'm going to put you over here where there's no stool. What did the worm do? He immediately wormed back into the stool. Right? So we don't want to be like that worm in the stool, right? Even if someone tries to help us, we go back to all these bad qualities and bad situations. So therefore, this constant chanting, Hare Krishna,
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
is recommended in this age of Kali Yuga as the Yuga Dharma, Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. We should always have the Maha Mantra in our mind, in our lips, and we should always be chanting as much as possible. Hare Krishna, Hare
Krishna Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Otherwise, we'll end up being like the worm in the stool. Someone will help us to chant Hare Krishna, but as soon as nobody is around, I'll go back to the stool, hearing about nonsense, doing nonsense, and so forth. Haribol. So thank you very much. All glory to Srila Prabhupada
Ki Jai.
Our takeaway today is not to be like the worm in the stool.